Good morning.
Good morning.
So I'll introduce myself for those of you who haven't met me yet. My name is Jimmie Scott, and it's my pleasure to be here this morning to fill in for my friend Sharon, who is the busiest woman I know. She's the busiest person I know. I was sitting there this morning thinking back about probably 20 years ago, and she invited us out to her home in California. I believe it was up in Tiburon, and to spend a couple of weeks for vacation. The first 3 days, she carried me around to every spot around the San Francisco area that you can think of. I was totally exhausted because I'd driven from Tennessee to California stupidly, not realizing how much time that would take, not to mention how many times I got lost. And she wants to go, go, go. And so after the third day, I said, Sharon, I'm going to spend some time on my own exploring the area. So I learned that she loves to be busy. So I got the message to participate in this sermon series for I don't know how many weeks. And as I understood it, the messages were based on the series titled The Power of Tested Understanding. And then we were encouraged to put our own particular take on that. So it came to me to speak a little this morning on a topic called carry your own water. And carry your own water is a simple African proverb that sort of speaks to a number of life practices that contribute to our life's journey and the development of our spirits and our spirituality. And some of these practices are pretty easily identifiable, and others are a little more subtle. Because in today's world, the thought of carrying your own water probably is normal, really. Everywhere I go today, I see people with bottles of water. They're in church, they're in restaurants, they're in stores. There's water all over the place. But when we think about the rest of the world and the areas where there's a lot of desert, water is not so available. I recall in my childhood, my grandfather had a little farm outside the small town I grew up in Campbellsville, Kentucky. And it was about 9 miles from where I lived in town. And it wasn't unusual for me to start out walking to my grandfather's house. And along the way, every so often, someone would stop and recognize me and give me a ride, ask me where I was going. I'd tell them, they said, well, I'm going 6 miles or 3 miles or whatever, and they'd give me a ride, and then they'd turn off on their little roads and go home. And so I'd finally make it to my grandfather's house. And the moment I got there, my grandfather was a pretty wise man. He realized when he could get some farm help for free. So he come up with a bunch of chores for me to do. And one of them was to feed his mule and his horse, which he used to plow his small garden and his tobacco patch. And theoretically, a mule and a horse don't normally team up together well. But somehow or another, he had managed to get them to be able to work in conjunction with each other. And so in order to get them water, he didn't have any running water on his farm, but it had a small artesian spring that was about 200 yards away from the farmhouse. And I'd have to go down to that spring. It's probably 200 yards downhill with 2 water buckets to get water to bring back to the barn to give the horses water. And 2 water buckets don't seem like much, but when you're a 70, 80-pound skinny kid like I was, carrying 2 buckets of water, which is, I think, about 2.5 gallons of water, back up that steep grade, it was an amazing amount of work. And so I'd go there and do that, and then when you get ready to plow the garden or to plow the tobacco patch, he would let me hold the reins. And, it seemed like a big deal in those days, and it still seems like a big deal to me. But what it taught me was how well the horse and the mule worked together. And it was almost as if we became one in plowing that small garden of that tobacco patch. And I look back on that, and it kind of feeds my soul because I learned a lot about perseverance. I learned about work. I learned about working together. I learned about loyalty. I learned about not expecting much, but getting a lot more than I expected. And when I think about this in terms of our world today, all of those values make a huge difference in my living experience and in the way I conduct my business of living. So I want to talk about this concept of carrying water today, because I think just in thinking about that and thinking about how people have to work in order to get water in other parts of the world, we kind of take things for granted in the world that we live in. We don't realize sometimes how complicated the world is. So the power of tested understanding comes into play in this, because most of the time we don't really understand what's taking place in other people's lives, in other people's place of employment, in other people's world. We're generally focused on what's going on in ours. And if we start to open ourselves up to be able to comprehend what other people are going through, I think we reshape the world that we live in. We can find peace, we can find love, we can find understanding, and we can, in that process, I believe, shape our nation in a way that it's never been shaped before. So, above all of this, I think the greatest challenge for every person in this planet is to be able to test our understanding, to really test our understanding. What do I mean by that? I mean, test how your soul evolved until this point. What made you what you are today? Every one of those experiences I just talked about are part of what made me what I am today. And they are part of what drove me to become a part of this thing that we call ministry, and to find people like Sharon and people that I've shared my life's journey with. A line in the Gospel of Mark, I think it's in the 8th chapter, and it's verse 35 and 36. And it says, "For whoever desires to save his life will lose his life for my sake. and the Gospels that he understands will save it. And if we put that in modern day English, it's saying whoever is willing to surrender their personal will to the highest and best within themselves will do well. And along with doing well, they will be able to rise above their ego self, their self-centeredness, and they will be able to find what is important, not just to themselves, but to everybody that they come in contact with. The single reason I think this is important for any of us on this spiritual journey is it helps to keep us humble. And in keeping us humble, it also helps us to continue to learn and continue to grow from our mistakes, from our misjudgments. It allows us to be a lot more intuitive as opposed to thinking that we already know the answers before the question is even asked. There's something that Albert Einstein said that never left me. He said, the intuitive mind is a sacred gift. And he said, the rational mind is a faithful servant. He said, but because we sometimes have more faith in the rational mind than we do in the intuitive mind, we have created a society that honors the servant and forgets about that precious gift. I find too many times in my journey, even at this stage, that is absolutely true. Because personally, I'm a constant overthinker. And I can see that in myself. I can also see it in others when I'm having conversations. So I have to back off and to calm myself down and to allow myself to be present to whatever's taking place in my life. And in my business, that's important because 98% of the time when I'm interacting with people, it's generally because there's a challenge or a problem that needs to be solved or at least needs to be looked at in depth. And if I'm a part of helping to find a solution to that, it's important that I be focused and be open and receptive. The proverb of carry your own water comes out of a rural African tradition because they had to transport water sometimes for miles, not just once, but throughout a 24-hour day. So the proverb kind of carries several layers and meanings. And those layers and meanings are centered on responsibility. They're also centered on appreciation. And it speaks to the value of hard work. Hard work without conscious intent. Hard work because it's a necessity, just to have a drink of water. And we can't fully appreciate that kind of resource when we live in the world that we live in today, where it's almost automatic. But if we think about it in terms of people who still have to do that, then it gives us a greater understanding of countries that we want to invade or people that we want to killed because we see them as being less than ourselves. And if we get that little bit of appreciation for other people's pain, for their labor, for their efforts, what they have to do just to earn a drink of water, it gives us a greater space for creating a more gentle world. So I want to talk a little about self-reliance, which is always a reminder to me that I have a certain personal responsibility. I learned pretty early on to rely on myself. And my dad and my mother, there were 6 children, and I was the oldest of 6. So it was, in a lot of ways, a pretty lonely experience because my sisters who were closer to my age were girls, and so we had different interests, naturally. Thank God for that, probably. But I developed a friendship with a young man who lived next door to me. His name was Bobby Hall. The family next to us was Reverend Hall. Reverend Hall had 19 children. I mean, 19 children. And he was a strict man. They weren't allowed to, the girls in particular weren't allowed to play outside because on one side of them was me and my brothers, and on the other side was Marshall Hatcher and George Hatcher and another group of boys. And so the girls were kept inside the house. And even when they came out, if a conversation was taking place and he saw it, he'd come out the house and make them come back inside. And I always felt kind of disturbed by that, not really understanding all of that. Today I understand, I think, a little more than I did then. But what arose out of that was a sense of hostility that I had for religion, because I perceived that religion was the thing that made him so strict and so conscious of everything that was taking place around him. So that in turn pushed me in a direction of my development that I had trouble figuring out who I was and what I was to do to make a contribution to the world. So it started me on a pattern of alcohol abuse and drug abuse and a number of other things that no youngster should have been doing, or no person for that matter. And it took me probably 20-some years to work through all of that in my mind and to figure out how to become a whole person again. And part of becoming a whole person was looking back at the lessons of carrying my own water and how that harmonized my spirit and harmonized my soul, and how good I felt when I could work with the mule and the horse to plow the garden or to plow the tobacco patch and to help make some income for my grandfather. And it's something I'll never forget. It's something that he never forgot. And he'd often remind me of it as I went on to become a young man and to go on about my business of trying to understand this amazing world that we live in. The power of tested understanding is kind of subtle. It's not an obvious part of our daily experience because we don't think about it as such, except or until we really have to work to understand something, or we have to rely on a power that is greater than ourselves to move to the next level of our experience or our existence or our achievement, or to another level of faith and dedication. And so these simple proverbs that we sometimes just kind of overlook are extremely important for us and for the development of our consciousness. Again, Einstein said the intuitive mind is a sacred gift, and the rational mind is a faithful servant. And both of those are amazing things to have as a part of our consciousness. The world's great holy books reference this idea in another way. They call it the still small voice. Some sacred books is known as inner knowing. In Unity, we often speak of it as discernment. Charles Fillmore taught that discernment is our innate spiritual faculty that enables us to look beyond the material appearances or to see those material experiences as an underlying truth or greater truths and use them as inspiration to change our condition or our circumstances. And it's powerful stuff. Unity has changed my life in so many ways that it's unimaginable. The friends that I've made, my group, as they're called, have altered the course of my life. The two children that I've been able to father and my two grandchildren are just immeasurable gifts to my life. And the guiding principle beneath those gifts is my faith and my trust and my belief in the power of carrying one's own water. But carrying the water is just a small part of the story. We truly have to understand the value of carrying the water. That's where the meat is understanding that all of those days marching up that hill, struggling with 2.5 gallon buckets full of water to feed some animals was an amazing lesson in humility and strength and generosity, really. And it's helped make me a better person. And if I'm a better person, I hope I'm making the world around me a better world, too. So what else do I want to put to this? I don't think I can add anything to that would make it any different than what's been said. Thanks for being here this morning. Thanks.